Hello and welcome everyone to our next webinar in NIS2 series. It was very high time again for a new discussion as a year has passed by since we met and a lot has happened. Honestly, we as the entire industry has gained lots of experience, and during this webinar, our aim would be to share very practical insights from the first year of NIS2 implementation and also highlight top learning and best practices. I'm delighted to be your host today, so without further ado, meet our speakers. I'm Turul from Treasurit, currently being responsible for information security and data protection, including the Swiss, the German, and the Hungarian operation as well. And joining me is Kun. Hello, Kun.
Hi again, Turul. Nice
Thank
to
you
meet
for
you.
joining us. To kick things off, please introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit the work you do on a daily basis. What can we know about you?
Yes, so I'm dividing my work. Partly, I'm working as a certification lead auditor. So I'm issuing ISO 27001 certificate for a certification body. The name you see behind me is brand compliance. On the other side, I'm working at HOWEST. It's a University of Applied Sciences in Bruges in Belgium, where I teach and also do research regarding information security and privacy.
Thank you. I guess you're going to be able to answer all my questions with so much experience. So let's start. First, let me give you a short overview and timeline about NIS2, as you can see on the slide. So the deadline for EU member state to transpose the directive passed in October, but last year. But many member states were lagging behind this implementation. NIS2 is a directive and not a regulation that member states have to apply directly. 7 years ago, GDPR was much easier in this regard. I think this is my personal view. Therefore, several member states have decided to use existing framework like ISO or NIS2. And what I experience and hear, companies often apply a wait and see approach, waiting for legislators to pass the law. However, this we will act when it's law is, I guess, it's a very dangerous mindset. And while legislation takes years, organizations are breached within seconds because cyber attackers are not waiting. Threats evolve fast, and attacks are fully automated, nowadays leveraging AI capabilities and scenarios very frequently, and they are more sophisticated than ever before, so countless precious personal and business data are leaked. Every millisecond matters. So Kun, taking into account these risky factors, what have we learned from the first year of NIS2 implementation? What is your experience?
I agree with what you're saying. So in my work, I've seen that awareness around NIS2 is definitely growing. So organizations know that something is coming or already is in place. But most organizations still struggle to assess the actual impact, especially in the countries like the Netherlands, and you see it on the map as well. A lot of countries, the national legislation is still pending. So, but even in member states where we do already have a law, and myself from Belgium, we have an existing law, there is still confusion. What's the exact scope? For example, group entities or subsidiaries in other countries, how should they apply the law, especially if you have different implementation legislation? On one side, they work with this framework, and on another side, they work with another security standard. So there is much confusion. And this uncertainty leads to inaction. They wait rather than take action now. And as you rightfully mentioned, cyber threats don't wait. So I would say don't just follow the letter of the law, act on its intent, the intent of enhancing your security maturity.
Very good that you mentioned this topic. Is there any additional practical steps you would highlight, like how organizations should estimate the scope, any strategical level topics like vulnerabilities, supply chain?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're talking now about suppliers, well, most organizations don't conduct proper assessments of their suppliers. So when they do, it's only because their certification requires it. So rarely do organizations act on a negative outcome. It's more the opposite. They go out of their way to avoid switching suppliers. And this is a mindset, I think, that creates blind spots in the supply chain security. So if we're talking about that topic, supply chain security, I think it should, as a company, you should do more than merely asking for some filling in a questionnaire or asking for a security certification. You should do better steps than this.
It's good that you mentioned that because what I hear also in Germany, Switzerland, and also Hungary is that NIS2 explicitly requires organization to assess and mitigate somehow the risk coming from the supply chains to protect the critical operations. And according to a lot of international studies, a very decisive part of data breaches involve vulnerabilities in third-party applications, vendors, or partners. And unfortunately, people, organization, based on my experience and what we see from Treasury perspective, often only take action when they start to feel the heat. And by then, I guess it's already too late. So supply chains are often the weakest link in cybersec. Even a small organization can cause very, very large-scale damage. And third-party vendors can introduce vulnerabilities if not properly managed. Let me just give you one example. Imagine that even a single but misconfigured server can open access to sensitive ecosystems, and the supply chain are complex. So, Kun, what is your professional experience? What are the common supply chain risks organization faces? How should they deal with them?
Yeah, I think you already mentioned that. So action is often taken too late. So what I would suggest is that you develop as an organization some supplier classification model. So you segment your vendors based on their impact and the risk exposure. And you use objective criteria, not because you're already working for a long time with that external company, but based on real concrete SLAs and KPIs. And also focus your attention on the most critical vendors. In most cases, this is not a very extensive list. I think you can limit your critical or key suppliers under 10. And for those, I would say do continuous monitoring. So an annual security check, a pen test report, a business review meeting, and also very important, have a clearly defined exit strategy. This is often completely missing. When I ask companies, okay, but who is your most critical one? They say, for example, a cloud provider like Amazon or Microsoft. And then I say, okay, but do you have an alternative? Is it possible to go without this supplier? And typically this is not the case. They don't have an exit strategy, meaning as an organization, they are completely dependent on one critical supplier, which is often not really close by. It's really difficult to impose some security measures on these huge American providers that are not even in the same region. So yes, this exit strategy, that is key.
When you mentioned that critical suppliers, we should keep the number under 10, what would you suggest? How can we identify or define one service provider and as critical, and who should make the decision? What is the best practice?
There is no one answer on that. And I think, Turo, you will agree with me. If I ask to the finance department, they will say that the tools or the suppliers that they are using are the most important. HR marketing will say the same. So all the decision makers of the company together, and typically that's on a management direction level or even the board of directors, it's on that level that the decision should be made. And typically it's where your money is. If you're a company that's in retail, of course, your CRM system is the most important. If you have a software company with coding, then the repository of your code, that's the most important part.
Let me just stay for a few seconds or minutes. Let me please help me understand what is the connection between the critical suppliers and, for example, business continuity management. What is the connection? Why is it important to have critical suppliers, and how does it relate to the BCM, BII, BCPDR topics?
Actually, for NIS2, both are important. There are both requirements. The connection, I think, is clear. If you are relying your business completely on an external stakeholder, and this external stakeholder is out because of some connectivity issues or because they had a ransomware attack, yeah, then of course your own operations can also not continue. So when defining your RTO, RPO, your business continuity plan, your recovery plan, you should come up with a strategy where you don't rely solely on external parties, or that you have at least some proper backup. For example, a cyber insurance with some external parties that can help you recover quickly without these key suppliers. You should always bear in mind that there is a possibility that they fall out.
You mentioned two phrases. The first one was the RPO, and the second is RTO. What are they exactly? What do they mean, and how should we understand them?
Yes. So the RTO stands for recovery time objective. It's the objective, so it's not a given state, but a goal as a company. The minimal time that is necessary to restore your operations. Let me give you an example. In a hospital, if your server is down, for some parts of the hospital, think of an emergency or think of where they do the actual where it's a case of life and death, then your recovery time objective should be very low, because if the system is out for even a few minutes, it can be very very bad. For the accounting, for example, that's less relevant. If your accounting system, your bookkeeping is out for maybe a few hours, that's of course not desirable, but it's not per se a complete catastrophe for your organization. So for each software or each service that you are using, you're defining, okay, what is the time that we need to go back to go back live and to restore our operations? That's your recovery time. The RPO, the other abbreviation, stands for recovery point objective. That's the maximum amount of data that you are allowed to lose. For example, if you take a backup every 24 hours, that means that there is a possibility that you lose 24 hours of data. For some systems, that's acceptable. For other systems, that is not. So you define your objective. What is the maximum amount that we can afford as a company, as an organization to lose?
And do
I hope that makes it clear.
Yeah, but do I understand you correctly that this value varies from companies to companies? So each company should decide based on the risk appetite whether the RPU, RTU is 1 minute, 10 minutes, 2 days, and so on.
Not only it varies based per company, but also based per service within an organization. One system to another can have a completely different RTO and RPO. And of course, the ones that are the most minimal, those are the ones that are most critical to solve. And typically, and that's a mistake I see often, they consider it as something, as an external given. They see a system and they say, okay, if this breaks down, it takes us maybe 1 hour to restore that server. Well, our RTO is 1 hour. That's it. The reasoning should be the opposite. You should define, okay, what is desirable for us, and then we will adapt our systems based on that. So if it's 10 minutes that your goal is, then you should purchase some new systems that can allow to go to restore within 10 minutes.
Thank you. I like very much this example. Let me just move on with the next question. How can organizations integrate supply chain security into their overall NIS2 compliance strategy at all? How would it fit?
Make sure that you have a full inventory of your operations. So that's a starting point. So it's not enough to only have a list of your suppliers. You should know internally, what are your business processes, what are your assets, what are your data flows? And then you also can define your third-party dependencies. So don't consider it supply chain security as an isolated issue. It's part of your integrated, like you mentioned. But starting with the full inventory, know what you have, then you know what to do.
As a short recap, it was very useful. Thank you. And what are those examples of effective supply chain security measures that you would propose? So what are these very practical advices that you would suggest?
Requiring certifications for specific suppliers, monitoring that goes beyond basic questionnaires. So not only once per year ask for a questionnaire that they give basic answers to, no, go deeper than that. Ask for compliance reports, documented controls, targeted vendor interviews. Also make it dependent on your user feedback. User, I mean internal user. If there are a lot of complaints on a certain system or service, yeah, that's a key, a trigger to take action in this. It should be integrated with your operating services rather than an isolated service that just does some mandatory checks every year. Typically, if you have some concrete KPIs or SLAs, I would say rather, for example, 99.9% availability. Yeah, if the supplier is not meeting this requirement, this is a perfect trigger to, for example, start a business review or to start a targeted interview. And if things don't improve, yeah, you can go further, go with a pen test, go with an on-site audit. But at a certain case, if things are really keep on being bad, yeah, you should make a decision and stop working with that vendor. So a clear escalation path, I would say, based on the performance of your supplier. But of course, to know what that performance is, you should have some concrete measures in place.
Can you name a few KPIs that you would suggest? Is there any general examples that we could or you propose to implement in-house?
Yes, so the availability is, I think, a good one. The response time, and when you have questions, how long does it take before they resolve it? The willingness of the other party to be transparent. So if you ask for certain documents, certain procedures, certain proof that they are at least also following some security practices, that they are willing to give this information, these are clear KPIs.
And what I would also add to what you have just mentioned is that NIS2 equips, based on my experience and what I see, NIS2 equips companies with frameworks and very useful tools to protect against threats, but they must be applied in practice. And NIS2 covers many aspects from risk analysis, cybersec policies, procedures to business continuity plans and much more. And in my imagination, cyberspace is like a chess game. So actually, you are constantly anticipating threats, and you have to decide which capabilities to deploy in your defense. Every move has to be strategic and anticipating not just the immediate risk, but the threats that are several steps ahead of you. This is my personal view. And as we are approaching a more operative level of our talk, let me dig more deeper. What do you think? What are the most effective, really technical and organization measures that it is a must or it is worth implementing if we are NIS2 affected companies?
Yeah, I think your comparison is very spot on. It's not only with one pawn that you are playing. No, indeed, you have to consider all possible options with all different stakeholders. If you talk about effective technical measures or organizational measures, yeah, I think there are a few very straightforward. For example, the MFA, the multi-factor authentication, that's a no-brainer. This is something that you must do. NIS2 is also mentioning this as a very key measure. I think some basic hygiene in terms of security. So install your security updates immediately. Install the antivirus. Make sure that you back up your data. The network segmentation, very important. If you go on the public Wi-Fi, that you don't have access to the internal network. Encryption. secure exchange of data. So don't send plain data via email, but make sure that you have some extra encryption. Vulnerability scanning, patch management, SOC services. That's more technical. On organizational level, yeah, governance is key. Make sure that you have clear roles, responsibilities, promote that culture of cybersecurity. And I know this is sometimes repeating, but it's by repeating yourself that you create or install a culture. Things in the physical world that are nowadays very straightforward. In factories, for example, that you wear a helmet. Yeah, this is the same thing that you should install when working in the digital world. So when you go off your screen, that you lock your laptop, or that you, if you receive an email, that you always double check, is it a valid email or is it maybe a spam mail? But these are key things that the only way to install that culture is by making the people aware of it. So make sure that you have proper policies and procedures. If there is a cyber incident, make sure that they know who to contact, when they should contact. This is all not rocket science. There are multiple aspects within the cybersecurity world that are very advanced, but you already go very far or a long way with some simple measures on a technical or an organizational way.
When you mentioned secure access controls and I guess encryption, cryptograph, let me just highlight cryptograph a little bit. So especially end-to-end encryption, I guess, is a very useful and only safeguard that can help ensure that the confidentiality, the integrity, and availability of systems and data are at that point that we defined. And why end-to-end encryption really matters is that it can only really ensure that the sender and intended recipient can access the data, even the service provider is not capable of decrypting it. And in addition to this, what I could mention as an advantage is that it really honestly minimizes the risk during data transmission, like for example, file sharing, messaging, during collaboration with third parties or remote teams, and even while storing in a cloud environment, and you have to trust a certain service provider. This is what I could mention. But moving on a little bit, and frankly speaking, there must be cases, honestly, that we have to learn from, the industry have to learn from. Did you hear about any pitfalls? What are the most common pitfalls that organizations should avoid? What is your experience? What would you suggest for us based on your one NIS2 experience?
Well, when you talk about pitfalls, I would like to answer pitfalls that organizations make when trying to improve their security posture. So when they are taking steps, but not necessarily the best steps. For example, the legislation, so the directive requires that you do it risk-based, that you identify your cybersecurity risks. And what we see in practice is that risks management stays at a very high level. So they say there is the risk that we have malware, there is a risk that a password is being intercepted, but this is very vague, and risks typically you want to mitigate with real controls. But if your risk is vague, your control will also be vague. So make your risks very concrete based on the experience that you had in the past, based on the incidents that you had. Also apply it on the systems that you're using. We talked before about KPIs. KPIs are typically very vague or unmeasurable. The ambition is there. For example, they want to improve the awareness, but they don't make it concrete, meaning it's impossible to track that actual improvement. Especially when we talk about certification tracks, the companies are ambitious. They want to achieve that certification per se, but they focus all their efforts on that sprint. And I'm always saying the security, as you know, is not a one-time effort. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's a living process that should improve. So if you are too ambitious reaching a certain goal, then we typically see that after a few months, after 1 year, yeah, that ambition is not achieved in practice. And we see that a lot of promises are broken, a lot of processes are not being followed up. So be ambitious, but be realistic, and it's better to go for the long run than to try to have everything fixed in one place, because you also have to create, you have to prepare your audience. Your audience should be aware or should be accepting your measures. We talked about multi-factor authentication. Yeah, if you are going to enforce that for every login within your internal network for every user, you can be sure that after a few weeks, they start to complain because it's not workable anymore. Cybersecurity is always a balance between the security and the pragmatism, and it should still be workable for your employees. There is also not a one-size-fits-all method. So adapt your measures based on the audience that you're working. Someone working with highly confidential data will typically have another way of going of treating that information than someone who just works in the factory and doesn't even have a laptop but only a cell phone of the company. So make sure that when you are enforcing requirements on your employees, yeah, change is always difficult, but especially if it blocks them in their daily operations, make sure that you take your time for this.
Assuming these factors as a baseline, how should companies prepare for future challenges under NIS2?
I think, and it's easy to say, invest in cybersecurity. And with investing, I don't mean throw money at it, but make sure that you have a proper project. It helps to appoint someone with a formal responsibility, a CISO, for example, but also at your highest management level. It's also required by the NIS2 legislation. Install your culture and install a structure. Make a process on the long run. So invest in money, but also in time for your personnel. It's not enough to buy all the fancy tools. You should also give your people or give your employees enough time to work with these tools and to install processes in their daily operations. And then a final note, focus on that cybersecurity awareness. Good behavior is more important than solely the technology.
Wow, Koen, these advices. I reckon we could show a very complete snapshot or at least a perfect roadmap for affected companies. So really thank you for joining and sharing so many practical idea suggestions. Dear audience, ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video and would like to learn more about protecting your data, please have a look at our Treasury Insight playlist for other videos. And remember, you can find out more about Treasury by visiting our website. So thank you and goodbye for now.